It's beautiful to see your faces here this morning and feel your presence. As we walk this path, the Sangha, I believe, is such an important part of it. And my talk this morning is on acceptance, but when I talk about its acceptance, I always really can't leave out love, because I think acceptance and love go hand in hand. So I'll be perhaps referring to that a little as well. I also want to start this talk with an admission of great humility. For 40 years now, I've been practicing, teaching yoga meditation and following a spiritual path. And I can honestly say that the practice of acceptance is one that I find most challenging. And so a good dear friend and advisor once told me, the things that you need to practice, you need to also teach, because in teaching them, you'll learn to practice them better. So that's part of my rationale for choosing acceptance as my topic this morning. So I'd like to begin with a quote from Master Sotasan. He says, "Being into non-being and non-being into being, turning and turning in the ultimate. Being and non-being are both void, yet this void is also complete." So this verse to me represents that true acceptance is really kind of difficult, and particularly for our minds to kind of grasp and understand. But it also reflects the interconnectedness of existence and non-existence, suggesting that true acceptance involves the recognizing of the transient and independent nature of all things. By understanding this, one can attain a sense of completeness and peace amidst an ever-changing flow of life. But for some of us, myself included, this level of acceptance is pretty difficult. And so what I'd like to do in this talk is maybe simplify it a little bit, make it a little more tangible, and maybe even a little more actionable in our day-to-day life. How can we take this beautiful concept and wisdom and bring it into our daily life in a somewhat easier way? Another quote from Jack Cornfield about acceptance. "Acceptance means not resisting what is. It means allowing life to be just as it is. When we truly accept, we find peace." So the question is, why practice acceptance? What does it actually, bottom line, do for us day to day? Well, one of the things is that true acceptance really opens up. It's a liberating process, because when we can accept things as they are, we open up to, in that moment, following that, choice. And the choice is, how do we be with this? How do we be with this situation, given that this is how it is? But if we're in denial about how it is, it's very hard to exercise that choice. Viktor Frankl is attributed, I don't know if it's actually his quote or not, some people argue about it, but it's attributed to Viktor Frankl. In the moment between stimulus and response, there is a pause, and in that pause, a moment to choose. So if we can be present to what's happening around us and take that slight pause to be fully present to what's happening and the reality of it, and make a choice about accepting it or not, first choice. And if we do accept in that pause, we then are liberated to choose how we wish to be with that. That's a little different than reacting, right? Sometimes something happens and the immediate thing is to react out of our conditioning, out of our past, out of whatever whatever, or the circumstances or the fears of the future or something else, and to react to what's happening. That's different than choosing, and that's not really taking the pause to take in what's really happening, because the future hasn't happened yet. It hasn't come yet. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? And all the stuff that happened in the past, that's gone. It's not coming back. So all there is now. And can we enter that moment now and find the liberating space to choose how to be with that? Some people think acceptance is sort of turning your toes up and saying, what the, yeah, and just suffering through, you know. All right, I can't change it, so damn it, I'll just accept it the way it is and get on with it, you know. With an attitude, of course, right? With a little bit of an edge around that. But that's not acceptance. That's acquiescence. And acquiescence is an acceptance. It doesn't take, acceptance does not take away your agency. It does not prevent you from acting in a way that can create a better situation, a better you, a better relationship, or a better world. That's all part of the choice that is open to you in the liberation of accepting what's really happening, without the story, without the reaction, without the fear of the future or the regret from the past. Very difficult. Not easy to do, right? So, like all practices, it takes some training, right? Some of it comes pretty easy if we can meditate and through our meditation practice come to that place of creating the pause, creating the stillness within, creating the clear mind. It's much easier to take that pause. But if our mind is cluttered and we're busy and we're going on the fly, going from one thing to the other, and there's no stillness, it's very difficult to choose. Also, if we're suffering greatly, if we're worried about things, if we're in fear, if we're in distress, if we're in pain, very difficult to take that pause. So again, it's a practice that has to be cultivated. And there will be times when it doesn't work out that way. Because another part of acceptance is accepting that all things, including myself, are imperfect. Imperfect. And in being imperfect, that is also perfect. Yeah. So, how do we accept imperfection? One of the best places to start with that is ourselves. Accepting ourselves as imperfect beings. I'm here, and as I speak to you, I'm learning. I've been around for quite a while. This grey hair didn't come easy. But despite the fact that I've been around and I've learned a lot, and I can stand here and talk, I don't have it all together. Far from it. I have much more learning to do. I am still imperfect. Just like nature. Look out the window, you'll see it. And nature is a great teacher of the reality of acceptance, accepting things being imperfect just the way they are, and always changing. That's the other thing about acceptance that makes it difficult, because things are always changing. Nothing stays the same. So just when we get comfortable with the way things are, someone moves our cheese and things are different. And we have to deal with that. We have to come back again to another level of acceptance. So there's the acceptance that comes easily by simply being in the moment and taking the pause, but there's other levels of acceptance that take a little longer. They take reflection, contemplation. So as well as meditation, a practice of contemplation, I think, is also useful. To be able to look at ourselves in retrospect and say, okay, what happened there? How did I respond? And how did that work out? Inquiry, right? The practice of inquiry. And it takes a little courage and vulnerability to do that. Because we sometimes have to fess up that, yeah, what I did wasn't all that skillful, wasn't all that wise. I could have done it differently. Instead of yelling when that person called me a name, I could have just paused and sat with the pain of that and said something else. Yeah, maybe. And that's not to say there's a right way to do everything. There's not. There's only the way that is skillful and wise, the way that brings, shall we say, a little more love to the situation and a little less fear. And if our choices of how to respond are governed by that, generally they're pretty well on the right track. But again, like I said, not easy. So I want you to know that all of these things I'm suggesting, all of these things I'm talking about, they don't happen in a heartbeat. They take patience. They take acceptance of imperfection. They take self-love. They take self-compassion. Compassion for yourself as a learner, as a being who hasn't got it all together. But you're here, and you're here sitting in this Dharma hall because you are committed to your growth. You're committed to being the best person you can be in life and show up for the people in your life with as much love, respect, and compassion as you possibly can. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. You'd be somewhere else. Yeah. So you're on the path. And the fact that we haven't arrived yet, that's okay. We have each other, which is also great, to support each other as we journey the path. So what are I'll give you a few simple strategies for acceptance, things that may or may not work for you, but in choosing, my suggestion is find the ones that work best for you. Find the ones that help you the most and the easiest. First thing is cultivating awareness. We've got to be aware to be able to accept. Because if we really don't know what's going on, it's hard to accept it. So being aware and knowing what's happening is really hard. That's pretty difficult these days, particularly on the global scene. We get so many input from so many different places, we really don't know. So in some ways you have to rely on your felt sense. What feels right? What feels wise? Where's the love here? And if you can sort of take in what's happening in the world with that understanding, it may help you discern what's really going on. But also refrain from immediate judgment and reaction. That's becoming increasingly difficult to do as things speed up in our world, and it becomes much harder to not judge people in power, people making choices, people making decisions. And there's nothing wrong with judgment in so much as to say, that's not the way I do it, or I'd prefer a different way, or this is not wise, and I want it to be different. Nothing wrong with that at all, and nothing wrong with having the agency to want to change that. But the big question is, how do you go about changing it? Is reaction the right way? And as the great teacher and patriot Martin Luther King said, hate is not overcome by hate. Only love can overcome that. And so reacting out of our hate, or our reaction to hate, by hating more, in my view, doesn't really do it. We have many great spiritual teachers in the Buddhist tradition, including the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, among others, who've demonstrated clearly that there is another way, that we can choose love rather than hate, and response to hate through reaction and fear. So the other thing we can do is embrace being overdoing. Sometimes when something happens, we just want to do something to fix it. And that's understandable. That's a great thing. And it's not to say that it's not good to bring skillful means to bear when something does need a fix. But our focus on being human doings rather than human beings can often get us into a little bother, right? So fix it is a great thing, but it's not always the right thing in the right situation, in the circumstances we're in. Sometimes it's best to just be for a while, to practice being. And all of the practices that we do here support that. They support how we be on the inside, how we be with ourselves, how we be as a human being. And so a little more focus on being over doing is really helpful, I think, in embracing acceptance. I've already mentioned compassion, and that's an important one. Compassion for self, compassion for others. How can we be compassionate for ourselves as being the imperfect being, and also share that compassion with others who we love and others who we don't love, those perhaps we may feel animosity towards. We've already mentioned imperfection, and that's a big one, of course, celebrating our imperfection and knowing that that's okay. So what if I can't accept? What if there are things that I just can't accept? Anyone been in that situation? I just can't accept that. Yeah, it happens. We feel it, and it's strong. I know there are situations in my own life where that's definitely been there. So what do we do in that situation? Do we try and force it? Do we try and say, okay, I've just got to accept this, tough it out? I don't think so. In some ways, that can actually make it worse, I believe. I think part of acceptance is accepting what we can't accept. For now, anyway. Okay, I'm having a hard time with that one. I can feel inside of me how difficult it is to accept that situation. And sit with the discomfort of that feeling. Being present to the discomfort, allowing it to be there, having compassion for the discomfort, embracing the discomfort, breathing with it, rather than rushing out to try and fix it, make it go away through fixing it, or the alternative, trying to squash it and push it out of the picture so it doesn't exist. Stoicism is really good in some situations to have resilience and strength. But I believe when it comes to accepting what we can't accept, it doesn't really help to try and tough it out. It helps better to be soft around it, to create a soft space around the difficulty that we have in accepting whatever it is we have difficulty accepting, being okay with that. For me, writing about or talking about acceptance is kind of bittersweet. I'm aware of the liberating force it carries, but I'm also aware of the suffering that goes along for the ride, and sometimes that acceptance can trigger. I was born an only child. I grew up in post-World War II in Australia as an only child, with a mother who'd been through the Great Depression, was the oldest of several in a family, and who had a pretty hard time in that role. I guess part of that made her committed to the fact that if she could possibly do anything to avoid it, I would not suffer. I got the golden ride. I got the charm treatment. Right. She'd made sure that I didn't get hurt. And when I did, she'd make sure I was okay. A lot of protection, a lot of care, and a lot of avoidance of confrontation for perhaps things that I should have been confronted about. You could say the spoiled child in some ways. So it was great in one way, but there was a downside to that. And the downside to that was a belief that I could always find a way to make things right, to take away the suffering, to not have to deal with or accept the reality of the circumstances that I was surrounded by, because I could find a way to manipulate, cajole, plead, beg, do whatever to get the circumstances to change so I wouldn't have to suffer. And so it wasn't in my best interest in many ways, because, and amongst other things, I didn't learn a lot about compassion or empathy or unconditional love for others, if I could get them to do things differently to make me more comfortable. And I also didn't have to endure a lot of the discomfort of even being alone, because I could always go find someone else to play with. And so it's only in my later years in life that I've had to face the reality of not being able to control the external circumstances to get my own way, to make it work, but to actually deal with and sit with the discomfort of separation, of loss, of fear, of old age, pending old age, and ultimately death. The acceptance there, no one can control the external circumstances and take it away. We've got it. It's ours. So I figure probably now's a good time to start practicing for that. And so acceptance now is really a daily part of my practice. Being with what is. And what's the way around that? Like I said, there are some things that are difficult to accept. And acknowledging the reality of that. Okay, this is true. I'm having difficulty accepting it. And now what's my choice? I'm not completely liberated by accepting it, but I do have a choice to be with the reality of, yeah, been aware of it, not fully accepting it, now what? And again, this is where I come back to love. And my choice is how to be with something when it's difficult, and no matter what the situation is that I can't control or can't manipulate to change the external circumstances. How do I be with these circumstances? And the choice is to bring more love to the situation. So even if people don't accept me, even if people are distant, even if people don't like me, how can I bring love to that and act in a loving way? And my experience so far, in a fairly short time of doing this practice, has been that it does actually work. It's not easy, but it does work. So my guiding principle now is, how do I bring love? And last weekend, my dear partner, I was teaching a workshop last weekend on deepening relationships at a place just up the road, big place up in Lennox, Mass. Probably know it, Rapalo. And in the shop, she found this little stone and gave it to me. It's got 2 words on it. It says, "Love wins." And it's very special to me because it's a guide. It's something that I can look at every day and say, okay, whatever's going on here today, where's the love? How can I bring love to this in some way? I'm going to wrap it up now, but before I do, just a few things that also help. For many years I've been a yoga practitioner and as well as a follower of the Buddha Dharma. And we had this beautiful beginning this morning with Karen leading us in a yoga practice. And to me, that's a great additional practice for acceptance. If I can go into a stretch and find that place of just in between, that place of not too much, not too little, but a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of an edge, and I can hang out there for a while, it is very liberating, because often what I notice happens is that sensation shifts, it changes. I can actually watch it change. And it's a great teacher because it teaches me how to hang out with a little bit of discomfort. Right? So I recommend moving and breathing as well as stretching your body every day and finding a stretch where you can hang out for a while. At least one that you can hold for a few seconds and see how that goes. Meditation, of course, and also reflection and contemplation. And journaling is a good one for this. To have a little record of, okay, so this happened today. This is how I chose to be with it. This is what I might have done differently. Or this is how I'd like to be with this when it comes up again. And it's not a way to beat yourself up and, be a chronicle of all your ills and wrongs. It's more a way of engaging into the discipline of inquiry to ask yourself, how might I shift this? How might I make this a little different? Something you might take away and reflect on, what's easy for you to accept and what's difficult, and what gets in your way of experiencing greater acceptance. And again, don't be harsh on yourself. Have compassion, have loving kindness toward yourself as you engage that inquiry. But it's a helpful and useful guide, I would hope. And I want to leave you with a prayer that has come to mean a lot to me, particularly recently, but it's one that some of you will recognize and I believe is pretty true. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I leave this for your consideration. Thank you.